Welcome to another episode of Red and Black, where your conservatism is not just the color that you're used to. I'm Lenny McAllister, and I'm here to tell you that the last time that anybody in robes did this much to upset half of the country, the robes were white, not black. I know. Bad pun. Shouldn't talk about the Klan, but there are some people that are calling people Klansmen, people's uncles, and threatening people's lives and everything else over a court case that dropped. And it's ironic because, usually you drop stuff on a Friday, Dr. Metzler, when it comes to anything from a news story to a legal story, because you want to dump it on a Friday so that it misses the news cycle. You could have dumped this literally at 2 o'clock in the morning, this Roe v. Wade overturned decision, and wouldn't have mattered. And we've been hearing consternation across the globe ever since. Let me go to you first. You're the one with the legal training. What do you take out of the decision? And then we'll get into the cultural ramifications, because there was not just Roe being overturned, but there was major gun legislation that came out by way of both the Senate, but also a ruling from the Supreme Court once again. But first, let's stick to Roe. What say you?
Well, as it relates to Roe, pretty much what the court said was, listen, it's not in the Constitution. It's not literally in the Constitution. The decision was made as a result of what we call substantive due process, which is a theory that the court pretty much rejected that theory and said, as a result of that, since it's not in the Constitution, as a result of that, what we're going to do is we're going to overturn this case, and we are essentially going to say that it is up to the states since it's not in the federal Constitution. That's really the summary of the case. This is how the court got to its conclusion. Now, there's so many who really believe that the court went out of its way to try to justify that. And there's so many who are saying that, in fact, when you look at the gun case, that what the court said there is, we don't trust the states to do this. It has to be done by the federal government. The difference, however, it's a technical difference, but the difference, however, is that as it relates to the gun case, well, there is the issue of the Second Amendment, in which the right to bear arms is explicitly in the Constitution. And so the argument that the court was being disingenuous is in itself a disingenuous argument.
So, Jeff, because you conveniently are wearing a 2A hat on this morning, I see what you're trying to do there, man. When it comes to the cultural ramifications, we'll go to the Roe overturned case from Friday, but let's also talk about what transpired earlier in the week with the gun rights, overturning the New York statute that's been over 100 years old. Culturally speaking, this is having a major ramification across the country. And every time we think, well, maybe the economy will unite us, maybe the war in Ukraine will unite us, maybe the pandemic will unite us, maybe we'll finally have some semblance of getting back on track as a country. Even the Senate bill, as narrow as it was, maybe that will bring people together. Nah, not so much. So as all these things dropped, what were you seeing from your purchase in regards to how it's impacting the country?
Well, first of all, Lenny, I'll say that your KKK analogy at the beginning of this thing was very apt, because we already know about the beginnings of abortion and what that was based on and what the motivation was behind that. Same thing with gun control. And even in this case with the New York Rifle and Pistol Association, there was some amicus briefs filed by left-wing groups talking about how New York gun licensing scheme was skewed against Black and brown people. But as far as the cultural ramifications, It's pretty much what you would expect. I mean, everybody's in an uproar, more so over the overturning of Roe versus Wade than the gun legislation or the gun ruling. But I mean, this is having a lot of ramifications. There's a lot of fear mongering going on. Women aren't going to be able to get abortions anymore, even though all this means is that it goes back to the states to decide how they want to handle abortion. There are trigger laws going into effect already, and the states that don't have trigger laws are already working on legislation to restrict abortion. So this is going to have some ramifications. People are very upset. I mean, we've already seen violence when the draft opinion was leaked. I expect to see a little bit more of that. Arizona, we had people swarming the state Senate building over abortion. So this will be in the news for a while, and it could even have maybe minimal impact on the midterm elections. But in general, it's been done. I think it'll settle down in maybe a couple months or so, if that. But right now, it's crazy, and it's going to be for a little while.
Priscilla, I'm going to push back on Jeff's point and pivot it over to you. I think that the argument was previously our court case decision in June is not going to impact the elections in November that much. If you have some of these economic issues still going on, you still have the war in Ukraine still going on. I'm now going to say that I disagree with that, because if you have the January 6th committee that's been going on for a little while now, if you have the gun decision, the overturning of the New York statute that dropped, and Roe v. Wade being overturned all at once, it's enough for there to be some momentum to energize bases at a time, Priscilla, when, let's be honest, it's not about convincing the moderate voter to be a swing voter. It's about motivating your bases. Those three things are enough to motivate Democrats, and particularly suburban white women, who are the new swing voter in many regards, to stay with Joe Biden like they did in 2020, and be just enough to buffer the Democrats. Now, I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but I think enough may have transpired last week with a multitude of things happening, not just one thing, i.e. the Roe v. Wade decision being overturned. Let's say
there's light years between now and November. So I think memories are short, and especially in left-leaning states where people are going to realize, hey, nothing's really changed. In Colorado, where they already codified the most extreme abortion laws, you can literally have an abortion up until birth. That's not going to change. So this decision reversing Roe v. Wade doesn't impact states like Colorado. So, and we saw some protests, some violent, some non-peaceful protests here in Colorado. And I think people are going to realize, oh, wait a minute, what does this really mean? Because we have a lot of Americans who don't fully understand what the decision was and what it meant. And as Dr. Metzler so eloquently explained, the differences in the Constitution, and people need to actually read the Constitution and not be reactionary so that they understand. So at the end of the day, when you ask people, what are your topics that are important to you, they're still consistently saying economy, safety, education. I believe the abortion issue is so low on the priority list and conversation list of everyday voters, because if you're in a red state, you have the trigger laws that are in effect. We have a lot of companies, major companies. I believe it's like Dick's, who's offering $4,000 for women to go and get an abortion. So I don't see this ruling actually changing anybody's lives, but I am very happy that our Supreme Court made this ruling. And I'm surprised it wasn't a 9-0 ruling, because you were surprised.
You were surprised.
This is not the right word. It's very telling that we have three justices who clearly do not understand how to interpret the Constitution.
Here's the interesting thing that I have, Dr. Metzler. It may not be, to Priscilla's point, right? It may not be that high on the priority list for voters, but they're not the ones that dump all the money into elections. Mm-hmm. The abortion issue is a very high priority to a whole bunch of groups that have a whole lot of lobbying money and a whole lot of political money, including dark money. Everybody says dark money is from the right. Well, the dark money is everywhere. It's on the right and on the left. And if there's anything to swing an election, it's getting bombarded on the airwaves with commercials. It may not move up, to Priscilla's point, on the priority list for the everyday American that's still paying $4.90 something for gas a gallon, but it will move up on the priority list for left-leaning donors that may have said, I'm going to sit this election out, or I'm only going to, put in half of the max, that may all of a sudden start maxing out. In states such as Pennsylvania, where the election laws are different as far as contributions for state elections, you might start seeing a whole lot of money dumping in saying, we just can't have a Republican governor in there because they may get rid of abortion. And now all of a sudden the money goes through the roof. What do you think?
Yeah, well, let's not underestimate the amount of planning that the left has been doing to respond to Roe. Let's not underestimate that. The message from the left is not just going to be about abortion. The message is going to be, you have less rights now than you did before. And by the way, Justice Thomas did not help in his decision, in his concurring opinion, by saying we're coming after everything except interracial marriage.
Hold on. Everybody that heard that, I mean, they memed him on Twitter, they memed him on Instagram, they memed him on Facebook, and it serves him right. I mean, you can't name 3 cases and be like, but loving, la, 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 la. No.
I mean, it's like, and again, and I understand that concurring opinions are for the future, but dude, leave it alone. If those issues, and then here's the other thing, he says, the court should re-examine that at some point. Well, he knows the Supreme Court doesn't have original jurisdiction. They can't just say, come on, let's do these cases. And so that's not helpful. And so I think you're going to see the left also saying that. Interesting, everything but interracial marriage. So that was
already saying it.
And Jeff, and the thing is, it does 2 things. Number one, I mean, it brings out the cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs portion where, I mean, AOC is talking about they lied under oath. It's an impeachable offense. Here we go again with impeaching Supreme Court justices. I wish people didn't learn, Jeff, the word impeach, because we've heard impeach with Clinton. We've heard it with Bush. We've heard it with Obama. We've seen it twice with Trump. We're now trying to impeach Supreme Court justices. Priscilla better be careful or she's going to get impeached from this show. It's like, it's ridiculous. So that's number one. But number 2, let's just be honest. When Justice Thomas does what he does with the opinion, it propagates the whole message and image of a nasty, partisan, mean Supreme Court that doesn't care about the country or the Constitution. It only cares about its own perspectives and views. And it doesn't help, to Dr. Metzler's point, not only because he didn't say anything about loving, which is just ironic in and of itself.
Yep.
But a very Catholic court can't really come across as being too Catholic-y, and touching Roe was going to do that anyway. But once you start doing other things like same-sex marriage and contraception, you stop sounding like a constitutional court that's trying to rule on the constitutionality. You sound like a Catholic-y court getting, phone calls from the Pope. That don't work for folks either.
Yeah, it definitely comes off that way. And I don't think that Clarence Thomas was thinking about that. I think he was just thinking about what he thinks of the law. But nevertheless, it is very ironic that he left out loving, because people are pointing that out. And honestly, they're right to do so, because if he was really standing on that principle, he would have included that as well. But as everybody knows, he's in an interracial marriage. So it is a very bad look. It's given the left a lot of ammo, because they were fear-mongering about this before the ruling even came down. They were already saying, oh, now conservatives are going to go after interracial marriage. They're going to go after gay marriage. They're going to go after contraception. And now they're using his opinion as proof of that. But the reality is that there still isn't really a movement on the right to reverse any of those decisions. There's not the political will to reverse any of those decisions. There was the political will to overturn Roe v. Wade. Since the year after it was enshrined in 1973, I mean, we've had marches for life. I've been to a few of them. There's been an overwhelming effort to make this happen. This is a culmination of 50 years of effort. You just don't see that with those other issues. Conservatives have pretty much accepted, okay, same-sex marriage is a thing. Birth control, okay, fine, whatever. I mean, a lot of people on the right, a lot of people are Catholic, but a lot of people are just regular Protestants, and Protestants generally don't have a problem with birth control. When you look at polling among conservatives, they're not trying to reverse same-sex marriage or contraception. So in reality, there's not much of a reason to be afraid of this. But again, Clarence Thomas is a high-profile figure, and he basically said the quiet part out loud, and by quiet, I mean almost non-existent. And now people are running with it. But I still think this dies down because he's still just one person. He can't lead a movement. And again, like was said before, he can't bring that to the Supreme Court. They don't have the jurisdiction. People don't, their civics lessons are not on point. So that's on full display right now on social media. People don't know their civics. They don't know how our government works. So they're taking this to mean that, oh, this is gonna be a horrible thing. No, it's not gonna happen.
And the whole, people on social media don't know civics. That phenomenon just started last week, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
But here's the thing, Priscilla, right? Part of this is, no, he can't start something, to Jeff's point, that he can re-spark arguments that have been out there previously. People forget the whole pushback on the contraception was not the use of contraception in America. It was the fact that you're a healthcare provider was going to have to pay for your contraception through your insurance plans, including Obamacare. And now the government's paying for contraception and the Little Sisters of the Poor and that whole case. People start looking and doing the research on that again. The same-sex marriage aspect of it. Now, here we come again with the civil unions versus marriage. And what do we call marriage? And is that going to be, forced down people's throat? And Jeff, I agree with you. The political will for abortion versus these other two issues, not even close. But Priscilla, we saw people not that long ago have the political will to push back on quote unquote government funded contraception and push back on government mandated same-sex marriage. It was less than 10 years ago. It's within the purview enough for it to be re-sparked if there's going to be a conservative quote unquote revolution. Now that you have 5.5 conservative justices on the Supreme Court, you're like, I did that, Dr. Metzler. I kind of go ahead, Priscilla.
Okay, sorry, I had to take a moment to actually react to that. Well, look, here we go. That's about we the people. Let's have the debate. That's what our country is based on. I'm not afraid of having a conversation or an argument or debate about an issue, especially when it comes to my tax dollars. So let's have the conversation. But I agree. The will to reverse same-sex marriage, I don't see it happening. We have too many family members and friends who are in that community, and we have the log cabin Republicans. I just don't see that being a threat, but there is that debate, of course, about the healthcare issue. So I guess what people need to do is pay attention to legislation, pay attention to conversations happening in their state, and jump in and be a part of the conversation, because whichever way you lean, you need to share your voice and make sure that your conversation is caring, humanitarian, and fair. And, I see the Republican Party leaning more towards the libertarian freedom side. Listen, you do you. As long as you're not messing with me and ruining my life and you're not imposing on my life, most Republicans are like, we just go do you. I think where the issue is with conservatives is when you start violating and treading into their what they view as civil rights. But in this situation with abortion, it has been an assault on the Black community. We have seen genocide. with Roe v. Wade and with Planned Parenthood, the data doesn't lie. So we have to pay attention to that aspect, and we can take out the whole religious moral aspect out of the conversation, because people try to use that and say, well, I'm not a Christian and I don't believe in God, so therefore on this topic. But constitutionally, everyone has the right to life, and life begins at conception, and that's scientifically proven. And the real estate doesn't change the fact that everyone has a right to life. And we have abolitionists in the space of the unborn. That's how a lot of us look at it. So whereas we have people fighting to free the slaves, now we have people fighting for the protection of the unborn. So that's where that conversation is for people who don't really understand why we're not calling abortion healthcare. In my opinion, that is the most ridiculous connection to murdering children and just this culture of death that the left continues to bring to us. That is not how we want to be as a nation. China, North Korea, and America. Like, that is not the club I want to be a part of when it comes to killing the unborn. I think we can do better as Americans. I think we can help mothers and families and fathers too who want to have their children. I think we can be humane. I think we can make it easier to adopt, cheaper to adopt. I think we can partner with young girls, with couples who want to adopt. And I don't care what the couple is. If you're loving and you want to have children and you're safe, okay, let's make sure that we can encourage bringing children into this world in a humanitarian way.
And I want to get to something real quick, and I don't want to bash on this person, but I have to mention it. And then we'll get to more of the cultural impact of the court. But some of the arguments for abortion came out where, people, they say that the inside part out loud. There was a conversation between Ann Stewart, I believe her name is, who's a Republican strategist on CNN, and Ana Navarro, who is also a strategist on CNN. And Ana Navarro literally made the argument that families should be able to have abortions because if kids with Down syndrome or any type of abnormality are born, it's such a burden on the family. The family should have an option to choose abortion. Now, anybody that watches the clip will hear, I noticed the clip because CNN featured it and said, watch Ana Navarro's passionate response in regards to abortion rights or something along those lines. So I watched it. I know I've worked with Ana. Dr. Metzler's worked with Ana in different capacities a long time ago, and we're all Catholic. So I wanted to hear what she had to say. Well, her argument was, I have a step grandson and I have other relatives that have learning disabilities, and it's a huge burden on the families. And the families get suicidal taking care of these family members with these abnormalities, basically implying that, well, they should have had the option to not have to go through this, which there's a whole slew of parents that would say, I would never have an abortion if I knew I was having a Down syndrome child. I did an event at CPAC with two individuals that one survived an abortion and the other one was a child that the parents did testing in the uterus and realized that child was going to have abnormalities, decided to give birth anyway. Child's become a leading national activist. My point is this, and I'm going to start with you, Dr. Metzler, as a fellow Catholic. When you hear people make the argument that we should be able to have abortion because we don't want to have a child that's not going to be 100% perfectly healthy, that's eugenics. That is all about that Planned Parenthood life. If you go look at the history, and if that's your reason for why people should be able to have an abortion, you're a eugenist. You are right hanging out with Margaret Sanger. And that's the epitome of why the pro-life movement has been as loud as they have been for the last several decades because of arguments like that. Now, maybe people out there will think I'm wrong. Put it in the chat room if you do. But I don't think so based on what I heard.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, for me, Anna needs to take a trip to the Vatican and speak with the Pope because, as we know, he'll be retiring soon. So she needs to go talk to him now before he retires. For me, though, as it relates to her comments, Anna has become quite a bit of a political hack. And so for her to even make that statement is outrageous. And essentially, as you said, Lenny, she is just over there. Why doesn't she just call up Margaret and have a seance? I mean, at this point, Anna's behavior is exactly the kind of thing that really, really irritates people and really, really gets folks in an uproar because she said the quiet part out loud, but lately she's been doing that.
And Jeff, and I'm not saying what the things that our family members have gone through is minor or that it should be overlooked or there shouldn't be more resources to help them or help them get through it. But it's egregious to make the argument that these children are flawed, so the family should have had the option to just take them out. I mean, people don't realize the value. You can't put value on life. And if you're playing God like that, then where do you stop? My kid's not going to be 6'3" and play in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I thought I was having a biracial child, but they're going to probably be a little too dark. Therefore, and people forget, if you look at the history of eugenics, it's not just abortion, it's sterilization. They were sterilizing Black people and poor people in the mountains of North Carolina in the late 60s and 70s, which is in the lifetime of almost everybody on this call. Priscilla, I'm kind of sparing you and giving you some grace as the lady on the show. But, these are not things from 300 years ago or even Nazi Germany. These are things that are as American as apple pie, and people overlook that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and I don't have to be as nice as you and Dr. Metzler do. Anna Navarro is not a bit of a hack. She is a hack. She is a full-on hack. That's all she is. She's cashing in on the whole TDS movement. She was broken by Trump, and now she's pretty much a Democrat supporting Democrat policy, just like Jennifer Rubin. She ain't the only one. But when I saw that clip, I actually wrote about that. And I was like, what is she thinking? I mean, we just got done talking about how Clarence Thomas said some things that gave people some ammo and that maybe he shouldn't have said. This is just beyond the pale. And I saw people responding to her, people who are pro-life and pro-abortion, like S.C. Cupp from CNN came out and talked about her autistic child. And I saw other people saying the exact same thing. We've heard these stories for years where people will say, I love my kid, even though he has Down syndrome. I wouldn't even think of aborting my child, even though I found out that he had Down syndrome while he was in the womb or had some other issues. So for Anna Navarro to come out and basically imply that these people should have been killed in the womb because they're not up to par, it's beyond the pale. Like, I have no idea what she was thinking. I know that she likes to say stuff to get attention.
Wait a minute. You know what she was thinking. That's the problem. That's what's, and I had to fix it for you, Jeff. You knew what she was thinking. You know what she was feeling. You know what she believes. And now we have to deal with that in a way that's just very, very, to me, deep and wrong. And look, I'm not.
And the fact that she used even members of her own family for this stuff, I'm like, wow. Like, I was like I've seen her go low, but I didn't think that she'd go that low.
Well, Priscilla, that's supposed to be the heartfelt part, and it is heartfelt. She feels for those family members and what they're going through. I'm not saying you should minimize. What I am saying is, are you listening? What did Chris Tucker say many, many years ago? Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Well, she may not have understood what she was saying, but thousands of Americans in that moment, because it wasn't millions, because it's CNN and it's TV and everything else, but
it's like 5 people.
Thousands of people understood what she was saying, and it is, in some instances, again, it's the epitome of what pro-life people say, pro-choice people say about abortion. that just throws the salt into this game where you can't find common ground because stuff like that comes out.
Yeah, I think this is what it looks like when you have a heart problem, where your perspective is, let's find every excuse to, kill a child, to this argument about, they're not perfect. We know that they're going to have a chromosomal defect or whatever. But, here's what I will say, because I do think in her mind that she was trying to show some level of empathy for her family members, that, yeah, it's hard raising children in general. And we as a community need to do what we can to, wrap our arms around parents, especially when they have special needs children. I'm a teacher, so I do this every single day, is wrap my arms around my special needs students and give them extra support. And that's what we do. We, as a community, we come together and we help and we support and we build strong communities. And I think that's the answer. The answer is not to say, if you're less than, and I'm going to determine whether you're worthy, your life is worthy. That's a very, very dangerous perspective to have and to spread. And I don't see her backtracking her comments. I was reading some of the threads and how people say, oh, well, what she meant to say was this. It's like, no. This is the ideology that has trickled down from the left, that has been repeated over and over again, and the lies that have been sold to our community, especially the minority community, about how this is a good thing to kill babies. And we need to work really hard to recover from that, because when you look at the population, especially of the Black community, 12.4% or something like that, we haven't even grown since the civil rights era. This is ridiculous. We're killing 1,000 Black babies a day. In New York, there was a year where more Black babies were aborted than were born. This is an issue. We need to stop, accepting what the left has been giving us as a quote unquote solution, and say, Planned Parenthood, get out of our communities. These payback loans, get out of our communities. These are the things that have been sold to us as good from the left. And it's a death culture. That's what it is.
Well, and I want to clarify one final time, because I know somebody's going to try to bring smoke and they're going to need to blow that smoke someplace else, if you know what I'm saying. We're not saying that having empathy for one's family going through difficult situations with a family member with special needs is something to just overlook or poo-poo or act as if it's not a big deal. That's not the argument. The argument is, you cannot take those trials and tribulations and say, this is why you should have never been born in the first place. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are other solutions that you can find. Like, for example, Priscilla, you brought up the point of, making sure that kids with special needs and families that are supporting family members with special needs have more resources. We have failed in that regard from a policy perspective. When we're wasting money on studies on sea turtles and do they do backflips on the 7th of January when the solstice is going to come 15 minutes early, versus money on something like that, yeah, that's a solution you can go after. We've seen grift and waste money throughout the history of American politics, particularly over the last century. We can redirect that money, but that's not the same as playing God and saying, well, this is too hard of a burden for me. I wish I killed you when I had the chance. Because that's kind of, in a very shrewd way, Dr. Metzler, doesn't that kind of sound like what she and many people, and I don't want to just put it on the left, because look, the bottom line is, you got a lot of rich conservatives that when the 25-year-old girlfriend gets pregnant, they're cutting checks and telling them to go to this clinic with a hat on, a hood on, and this is the alias you give, because my golf buddy will take care of this. So it's not just a left or right issue. This is very much, in some instances, a morality issue and a valuing of life perspective, particularly when it comes to special needs, with the argument that Anna Navarro brought up.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly the point, relative to her bringing this up. And again, it's beyond this notion of the fact that she always wants to be outrageous. It exposes, in fact, the kind of just loony thinking, as you said, on all sides of the aisle. I mean, part of what we talked earlier is about this issue not really affecting the elections in the fall. But once again, on the right, we tend to grab defeat from the jaws of victory. If states start doing things like criminalizing abortion, prosecuting women who have had abortions, if they start saying, if you travel to another jurisdiction to get an abortion, we're going to prosecute you. First of all, on the third issue, you can't do that. It's called the Constitution. You've got freedom of movement. At the state level, we have to really look at how far are folks going to try to go to, in fact, work on this abortion issue. If they do that, though, it keeps the issue alive up until and during the election. So once again, states have to be very careful. Once you start talking about criminalizing abortion, that is going to present a whole different can of worms. It's going to open up, look at who they are. On the right, they're criminalizing women. They are saying that a 13-year-old girl who was raped is now a criminal. She has a record for life. Again, we have to make sure if the right is saying these are, we don't want this to affect the elections, then at the state level, be careful what you do.
Jeff, and it seems interesting that Dr. Metzer brought up this point as far as going too far, because let's combine the empathy issue we were talking about with Ana Navarro and combine it with the going too far aspect of this. Conservatives have missed the mark, and I know we haven't talked about the gun issues, but we are talking about the cultural ramifications of what SCOTUS did this past week. They haven't done a very good job of showing that we care about the Constitution and we care about the well-being of the country, which is why we're ruling on this from a constitutional perspective. And then subsequent to that, conservative activists and politicians are not coming across as people that, generally speaking, care about America or their states or their communities as a whole. It's coming across as very, very divided, very, very partisan. We only care about this big notch we got. Look, we finally won the Super Bowl of election issues. We won the Super Bowl of court decisions, and they're kind of running around with a trophy over their head, rather than saying, okay, there's now a huge new swath of pain that we're going to have to deal with, people with issues that we're going to have to deal with, and a way of dealing with this from a cultural standpoint, a societal standpoint, a political standpoint, and a policy standpoint. And we need to do this with kid gloves, pun and no pun intended, depending on which way you want to take it, to make sure that this is dealt with in a way that's humane and gentle and not explosive or any more explosive than it already is.
Yeah, there are a lot of people cautioning about that because, let's face it, our messaging on the right is typically pretty atrocious. I've seen us improve a little bit over the past year or so when it comes to overall messaging as far as policy and things like that. But on this issue, we are spiking the football a bit. And the thing is, people are saying, oh, conservatives don't care about the life after it's born, or they don't care about the mother. The reality is actually the exact opposite. We have a lot of these pregnancy crisis pregnancy centers. We have a lot of pro-life organizations that are specifically designed to help mothers who are in a bad situation but don't want to abort their children, or are wondering whether they should or not. They're all over the place. They get millions and millions of dollars in donations every year. They are very much involved in their communities. We just don't really talk about them that much. We don't blast them all over the place like the left blasts Planned Parenthood. we have an answer for that. And the argument could always be made that more could be done. Sure, especially right now, since fewer women are going to be able to have abortions, we should increase that. But that kind of lends credence to what the left argues about us. But really, this is just a matter of putting the lie to that argument and really showcasing these organizations that are out there. I mean, Fox News, other conservative media should be showcasing the people who are down in the trenches with these mothers who may be thinking about abortion, but then they persuade them not to, and they say, we're going to give you resources to help you have this child, to help you put them up for adoption, or if you want to keep them or whatever. A lot, if these places didn't exist, then these pro-abortion extremists wouldn't have anything to bomb, and they're firebombing pro-life organizations. They're firebombing churches and vandalizing them. So they do exist. We just need to do a better job of highlighting that, saying, yes, we believe abortion is wrong. We don't want you to kill your child, but here's also what we're doing to make it easier for you to give birth.
Priscilla, isn't this also an opportunity for conservatives to really be a lot better with policy? I mean, look, and messaging, and Jeff brought this up too. Look, welfare queen isn't something that Jimmy Carter was saying, right? I mean, let's just be real. The whole image of Black people sucking up the Section 8 and, the drugs and no daddies in the homes, Herschel Walker, and all that other rhetoric, Candace Owens, has been coming from the right in regards to Black women need to respect themselves, and they don't, and so they have all these kids, which, by the way, would be a good, after hearing that rhetoric, if you're Planned Parenthood, seems like an opportunity. We, as conservatives, have an opportunity, people on the political right, have an opportunity to have some policies that may make it easier for adoption, that may make it easier for people to get up on their feet, may make it easier. I mean, the welfare cliff is something that both conservatives and liberals, the Republicans and Democrats have been trying to deal with at the state level to make sure that as you're climbing out of poverty, you don't get to a point in time where you make more money on your job than you would get on benefits. So it seems as though if there's ever a time for Republicans, particularly those that are in charge at the state level, to pivot into a more, to quote George W. Bush, compassionate conservative platform, this would be it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really that simple and that basic. So it's hard for me to separate my Christianity from my political views. Yes, there's definitely an order that God has designed. We know the data about quote unquote privilege, graduate from high school, get a job, and get married before you have babies. If you follow those 3 steps, your chances of being successful and not in poverty and not incarcerated, it goes way up. But the Bible also says that children are a blessing from the Lord. So if you view life and children as a blessing, that changes your perspective. And if we as conservatives, and there are conservative Democrats as well, so I don't want to just make this a Republican conversation. If we as conservatives can get back to strengthening the family and being more humanitarian and problem solving this, and not just pounding people over the head about, well, abortion is wrong. That's not what young women need in a crisis situation. We need to go to our legislators and say, how can you allocate funds to help communities with education, with if you're a young girl in high school and you have to drop out, how can we help that young girl get her GED and get some college credit while she's, going through her pregnancy? How can we partner this young family, this young girl, with resources for food and diapers? What other training and resume building can we help? What kind of skills can we partner young girls and even young men with? Because I want to emphasize that we have young men who do not want to be put in a situation where they lose a child. There are a lot of young fathers who want to take responsibility. And I don't think being punitive is the answer to this issue. I believe that we need to wrap our arms around these young people in services, because we're spending tax dollars on all kinds of social services that have been actually damaging lives and damaging communities. Why can't we pivot and put those resources into helping people? And yes, to Jeff's point, so many private organizations. I can tell you right now, if you're a young person and you need help, I can point you directly to a charity that will help you with your medical exams and your formula and diapers, seeing as if there is formula still on the shelves, if our president can get his act together and help with that. But these are the things that I'm talking about. I think we're all in agreement that if the Republican Party and Republican candidates and legislators can take a step back and say, here's where I can impact change in a positive way, it could actually help in the election this November and elections going forward.
Well, Dr. Master, she brings up an interesting point. She said private organizations, right? And so this is where Republican legislatures and Republican city councils and even Republican Congress people have said, look, it's not the role of the government to help you through your own personal crisis. It's the role of private organizations and the church and faith-based organizations to help you through. And if they can help you through, oh, well. And then the flip side is, but the state, in this instance, the Supreme Court, in your private situation, i.e. this pregnancy at 16 weeks, has a right to say, that's too far. It's no longer private. Therefore, we're going to step in and go from there. That seems to be the crux of where people that are on the pro-choice side of things say that this is where the pro-life folks get it wrong, because they want to play both sides of it. It's a private issue, private business, personal item when it's fix yourself. But when there's other choices I want to do to quote unquote fix myself, and I take the life part out of it, I get that there's another life involved in this. But it seems as though the mental gymnastics of some of this, whether it's the gun issue that we heard about with the New York statute or this case coming out of Mississippi that overturned Roe, it seems as though there's a little bit of legal, mental, and political gymnastics going on from some of those on the right, which is what confounds and even, I dare say, angers people on the left, because there's not a continuity of argument.
Well, yeah. And I mean, increasingly, Republicans are speaking out of both sides of their mouths here. Look, this notion of government helping, government helps in every state. There is no question about that. Millions and billions of tax dollars in every state for state agencies, those kinds of things. So let's not pretend that, well, we don't want to get involved. That's the state's bit. That's not the state's business. Come on, that's just not the reality of how these things are done. And to the question of adoption, as we're talking about adoption, here's the thing that isn't often talked about. As it relates to the adoption agencies, when it's taking folks 3 or 4 years to be able to adopt a child, that presents, and what is that? Nothing but government bureaucracy.
Thousands of dollars less.
Yes, and that is exactly what it is. So you've got these kids growing up in foster care. By the time you get them out of foster care, they're so much older. They have their own kind of things they've developed. When the way that you want to be able to nurture kids, if you're going to adopt them, is when they're younger, not when they're 12 or 13. But the process of taking years to go through this so-called home study by these people who are supposedly masters of social work, they're really masters of nothing, because the children don't end up getting adopted. Instead, they're stuck in foster care where they're often abused.
And particularly, Dr. Metro, disproportionately, what do those kids look like that are stuck in foster care? That
black and brown. It's black and brown kids. I mean, that's the reality.
So, and I know we're wrapping up soon. And again, folks, like, share, subscribe the show, or as Priscilla likes to say wiki, 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 reverse, and do the reverse of that. I'm not trying to figure that out. But when you look at all the stuff that's coming out of the Supreme Court, it's funny because everybody's thanking Donald Trump for this. And and Jeff, maybe I'm wrong, but Jeb Bush would have given you this if he had the same opportunity. Marco Rubio would have given you this if he had the same opportunity. If you have a Republican president that gets 3 slots for the Supreme Court, I can't name any of the 16,735 people that ran for president in 2016, including Bobby Jindal. Remember Bobby Jindal? I think that even Bobby Jindal would have gotten these 3 justices aligned in such a way where you get this. So I get why they say it's Trump because he was the one that was in there. But isn't this more of a Republican victory? And some are even making the case this is even more of a Mitch McConnell victory because of what happened with Merrick Garland than it is for a Donald Trump victory subsequent to the 2016 election.
Maybe, but you have to remember we did get Souter, we did get John Roberts, so I don't think it's guaranteed that any other Republican would have done the same thing. But I mean,
Trump 5.5 conservatives, right? So there's at least that half.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but Trump. I mean, with Trump, I mean, there are other Republican presidents who probably would have done the same thing, but it's not guaranteed. So I mean, Trump should get some of the credit as well as even McConnell and then some other people as well.
Well, actually, I think this is a Ruth Bader Ginsburg victory more than anything else. Because Ruth was not getting off the court. She said, "I'm going to die on the bench." And if there was a Democrat who had the opportunity to appoint her replacement, I think the decision may have been different. Without Ruth deciding not to leave the bench, there would have been no Amy. So
I mean,
there we go.
And that's a very valid point, Dr. Metz. I mean, Priscilla, sometimes if you're a team player, you got to know when to retire. And look, if you retire, if you're Ruth Bader Ginsburg and you retire, because she was having health problems, but may God rest her soul, she was having health problems for a while. If you tell her 2014, 2013, 2012, if President Obama wins re-election, we need to replace you with a Democrat. I think this, and I'll say this and then we'll wrap this up. I want to get everybody's opinion on this. This seems to also play less into RGB's, or I said it backwards, Ruth Bader, RBG's, got her initials backwards. Her arrogance, because you can blame her a little bit, Dr. Metzler, but this also seems to go into the Democrats just 100% believing that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president of the United States. And that it didn't matter because if Hillary's going to be the president, she can leave whenever she wants because the Democrat's going to appoint a Democrat to the Supreme Court. And then when Donald Trump became the nominee, that arrogance went on blast that they're definitely going to have a Democratic president. So it didn't matter when she left and it backfired. Am I wrong, Priscilla?
You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. And they didn't know. So, I guess that's the game of politics. And what I would say, though, as I'm watching AOC and Maxine Waters talk crazy like a bunch of crazy women and getting all up in the judicial part of our government, they need to sit down and stay in their lane because they are driving everybody nuts. And they look ridiculous. And it's too bad. Elections have consequences. And I am celebrating life, but that doesn't mean the work is done. We, as pro-lifers, need to be smart and empathetic at the same time and not just be like one-dimensional on this topic, because that is going to definitely damage us in the future. So we got to problem solve that.
Jeff, 30 seconds. It's less about Bader Ginsburg and more about maybe the arrogance of how they approached 2016.
Yeah, very, very much so. I think that it is the arrogance, and like Priscilla said, elections do have consequences. So this is what happens.
Dr. Metzler, very quickly before we go, elections do have consequences, including 2022 with this coming on. How much of a runway does all of this past week have in regards to getting us to November?
Well, it largely depends on what both sides do relative to this, and how do they play it, and how do they put this whole theme together about, they're making your 13-year-old a criminal. I mean, we're just going to have to keep looking for that, because if Republicans overplay their hands, it's not going to end well. And again, I actually think that in the Senate, Democrats are going to pick up seats. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, I think, and they're going to probably keep Georgia. I think those Republicans really need to pay attention to that. Wisconsin is not going well at all for Republicans. Pennsylvania isn't either.
And with all the stuff that came out about Ron Johnson this past week, and we'll dive into that next week, there's more going on in Wisconsin. We saw some poll numbers coming out in Pennsylvania that had Fetterman with a comfortable lead. We'll get into that next week. Jeff, very quickly, tell us about what you got going on this week.
I got the same old. I got interviews coming out on Wednesday and Friday evenings at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard. So if you want to watch a Fresh Perspective YouTube channel, I'll also have another audio podcast dropping soon.
Priscilla, very quickly, what do you got going on this week?
We've got the primaries in Colorado, so tonight is going to be a big night. So that's just stay tuned Wednesday morning to see results.
Dr. Metzler, very quickly, what you got going on this week?
World Economic Forum this week and human rights issues.
Folks, thank you for joining us on this episode of Red and Black. Make sure that you follow us on YouTube. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. And make sure you tune in next week. In the meanwhile, we'll talk to you soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. TCNGB, take care and God bless. Peace.